Hello, everybody. Ben Rogers here, the Raptors Digest. Riker, we're in the deep part of the offseason, but we have some news coming from Nick Nurse. He's been giving quotes from the Team Canada training camps, and one of the quotes he gave out, which was pretty interesting, was when he was asked about OG Anunoby, he said that they're going to plan on bringing OG back out there on a primary role next season. And this is, as a huge OG Anunoby fan, this is very encouraging because he was a starter for that almost 60-win team at his rookie season. He's only 22 years old, and last year, even though his stats increased a little bit, but it looked as if he had almost fell off a little bit from his rookie season. But it's going to be great to see OG get an opportunity to get back to that rookie season curve and projections that we all expected OG to get back into.
Yeah, well, he's a man that was hampered by injuries last season, so it's difficult.
Yep.
And also, of course, him being the same position for more or less as the guy that brought us a championship. So now and my biggest criticism, if you're a fan of the podcast last season, my speculation on what was going on was that there was a serious sense of role confusion, and that happened the most for OG Anunoby above any other player on the Toronto Raptors. So now, there's going to be a bit of a fight to see who emerges as the starting three, the starting four position, because most of the guys that we've acquired this offseason could fill into that spot as well. But it's up for us to discuss now and for people to bring in their thoughts. What does the actual quote from Nick Nurse mean? What is his exact words again, Ben?
Yeah, so Nick Nurse came out and said that the next season we're going to get OG Anunoby back out there on a primary role. So he won't be in a fringe rotation piece, as you mentioned, because he went from a starter to a guy that was fighting for minutes at the end of the rotation. Some games he wouldn't play that much, so he was usually in the games when he was healthy. Obviously, they couldn't integrate him back with 3 games to go in the NBA Finals, but when he was healthy, before that appendix injury happened, he was playing most of the games, but some games he'd get 30 minutes and be closing out games, and then he'd get injured or so, and then he'd only get 5 or 10 minutes one game. So it was a very odd season for OG Anunoby. It's almost in the same likelihood of as Norman Powell 2 seasons ago when he had the GoDaddy curse, but he was back playing behind DeLon Wright and DeMar DeRozan, and he just had those dominating playoffs, and he got that big contract, and then he came into the season as a starter, and then he was back relegated to a deep bench piece, and he really struggled in that position.
Yeah.
So,
do you think
Ben, OG?
Before you ask me, this is what I'm honing in. I'm honing in on the exact wording here. Primary, because this is up for debate. This could be up to interpretation here. Does primary mean he is going to be a primary ball handler, a primary facilitator? Will offense run through him? Will he be primary in the sense that he's going to be a consistent starter? Will he be primary in the sense that he's not going to flip-flop around from being a starter to a bench guy? Will he be primary that he's a primary guy off the bench? What do you think that means? Because he didn't say he's going to be a starter. He didn't say he's going to be the number one guy. What do you think, if we were to break down Nick Nurse's exact words, what do you think this role of the upcoming season for OG Anunoby in the expectations or the eyes of Nick Nurse is going to be?
Well, I think I'm going to preface everything by saying I think this season will be fluid. If OG Anunoby gets an opportunity, it doesn't perform, we have guys like Stanley Johnson, Rondé, all those guys that are going to be looking for minutes. But what I interpret from this quote in terms of primary, I think he's going to get the starting position coming out of the year, assuming he's healthy and has a strong training camp. I think that's what Nick Nurse plans on giving OG Anunoby, seeing what he did with that kind of role 2 seasons ago. Everyone knows the talent that's behind OG Anunoby. Just the raw skill set, the physical frame, the ability to shoot it from deep. Yes, he doesn't have a great feel for the game, but when he's out there and he's consistent and he's confident, he's a very strong player. And he dealt with a lot of injuries, personal stuff last season, and then about 3/4 of the way through the year, Riker. Remember, we made the podcast predicting that OG Anunoby will break out the second half of the season after the All-Star break. And, he really started to pick up his game. His stats went up. He ended up having the season, because the first couple, 2-3 months, his stats were way below his rookie year. But then he ended up increasing his points to about 7 points per game, 3 rebounds. It's not the greatest shooting percentages, but he made everything a lot better the second half of the season. And just as things started to go right for OG, he had that unfortunate appendix rupture. So he just had a very unfortunate season last year. And I think Nick Nurse understands that. He sees the talent, and he's a guy that you got to give that opportunity to. He's not a guy you should hide on the bench. I think with his primary role, it's going to be a starting position at the start of the season. Not a guy that's going to be Kawhi and run the offense through him, but a guy that's going to have a few plays for him to shoot some threes, but be a starter and be an integral piece to this team.
Well, the big question mark is, who is the offense going to run through? We are obviously going to look to Pascal Siakam to be a more consistent player. I made a claim that he was the most consistent player until leading up until the playoffs, because he was getting 20 points basically every night. So I'm going to look for him really to be that kind of guy. Kyle Lowry, it's maybe going to be his last season that he can be an alpha, he can be a starter. Some are saying maybe it's time for him to take a bench position, but of course we broke it down earlier in the offseason that Fred VanVleet, it's looking like he is probably or maybe going to start at the shooting guard position, which means they'll probably play a tandem, himself and Kawhi Leonard. So there's not a lot of guys, though, that are big that can create their own shots. And especially if you're running the 1 and 2 with Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet, maybe we'll play small ball, maybe with Ibaka at the center. It'll probably be Marc Gasol, but he didn't show a lot of offensive prowess last season, so maybe he'll take a step up. But it is an interesting spot that OG will find himself in if he's going to get more confidence from Nick Nurse, because once the lineup started to really get solidified, there was no way that he was going to jump back in, even when he was healthy in the playoffs. It just didn't make sense to try to see how he would fit when the team was rolling so well. So if Nick Nurse will give him the confidence, there's finally no alpha person on the team. There's no Kawhi Leonard. There's no DeMar DeRozan type that will really
demand all those shots.
Exactly. And that's not necessarily a good thing when you're a championship contender, that you don't have a number one person that off the top of your head that you think who's going to get the shots, who's going to be the number one guy. But if OG Anunoby can elevate his game, if he can become a 15 point per game guy, he's on the right track, I think. But yeah, I think we can't expect too much. We can't expect 20 point per game OG Anunoby or anything crazy like that. There's just no way you go from being a 7 point per game player to that much of a jump.
Well, we saw a jump like that from Pascal Siakam from his second to third year. He went from 7 points per game to 17 points per game. We're expecting even greater jump next season. And you brought up a lot of great points, how we have a lot of shot creators kind of in our backcourt. Kyle Lowry shown that this will probably be his last season where he could be a primary scorer. Maybe not the top lead scorer, but a guy that can get 14, 15, 16 points per game. Fred VanVleet showed, especially in the playoffs, that he can really take over a game with the shooting. And Norman Powell showed in the playoffs that he can take over some games with his explosiveness driving in. And maybe if he gets consistent run, he could be a scorer. But we have a lot of guys in the backcourt that are kind of scoring-oriented players, but in the front court, you mentioned it, there's not a lot of players that kind of fit that mold. Pascal Siakam's the exception. He did a really good job at increasing his scoring ability this season, and the rest of them, Serge Ibaka, he had a better scoring year last year, but that kind of tailed off when Gasol came in. Gasol, same sort of deal. He started off the season, his whole Memphis career, he was a primary scorer, but when he came to the Raptors, he only averaged about 9 points per game, and his value was really felt in his passing and his defense. So there's going to be need for front court players to get some buckets. We don't really know if Rondé or Stanley Johnson can really do that yet. We don't know if Chris Boucher is going to develop. So there's going to be a lot of shots to be had. With Danny Green and Kawhi Leonard gone, that's probably about 30 shots a game that are for the taking for guys like OG, Fred, Norm, even Siakam. So I think OG is going to have this opportunity to grasp these minutes, these shots, and I think he'll take advantage of them. I agree with you. I don't think it'll be a 20 point per game or even a Pascal Siakam-esque jump, but I think he'll be able to be a consistent contributor on the wing for the Raptors, and his value will be really felt in his his cutting ability, his defense, and how he dunks in the lane and his 3-point shooting. But Ryker, the one thing that we kind of mentioned throughout the year was when OG was playing, his feel for the game didn't look that great. He was kind of zoned out of the game a few times, and that happens when you're in and out of the lineup, whether it be due to injury or other things happening off the court. But if OG can get that feel for the game back, we kind of saw in his rookie season, maybe develop a handle, right? I'm not saying a Kyrie-esque handle, but a guy that can at least slash with his athletic ability. Do you see OG Anunoby being a consistent starter on this Toronto Raptors team next season, and deservingly so, or do you think he'll be relegated to the bench role and Stanley Johnson or Matt Thompson, someone random, will step into his position?
Yeah. You mentioned that Siakam took the jump from his second to third year, but do remember that he was on a path that could happen because of his bench position, right? He was getting pretty consistent minutes off the bench. He was number one, number two guy off the bench. He was doing things we always were saying throughout his second season. If he developed a jump shot from the three, from the corner, where he's getting open shots, then he will become a good player. You know, we could see the potential. The issue with OG Anunoby is that it's not the same. Because, yeah, he started the majority of the games in his rookie season, but his minutes per game was almost the exact same when he came off the bench in almost the entirety of the season that he played in the previous season, right? His points were relatively the same. His field goal percentage dropped a little bit. And now, again, I'm going to take that because it's hard to play when you have a superstar on your team and you're the same position. You know, and maybe it's a bit of a confidence thing as well. There's a lot of different factors that can play in. But the thing is, it made sense for Pascal Siakam because you could see that continual improvement. You could see the points that he needed to improve upon in order to make his breakthrough. With OG Anunoby, I just don't see that he is one step away, one improvement to one part of his game away from being a guy that can get 17 to 20 points and be a starter and play 30 minutes per game. I think there's a lot of things that needs to happen. I think he does show potential, but I think his potential is the overall that he could be good, not that there's a few things that he needs to do in order to immediately be good. That's my take. Again, you're much higher on OG Anunoby. I've never been at the same level of confidence into him that you've been. I just think that, I think that he's a season away, unfortunately, from being a season away. It's a bit of a cliched comment to make. I just want to see one season of saying, okay, he's got everything except a handle, or he's got everything except a fluid jump shot or a good pull-up. Right now, I think he needs to work on his IQ. He needs to work on his handle. His jump shot, he can make a few, but I think his form is pretty bad right now. It looks pretty atrocious to me.
His
he has no pull-up game.
Slow.
He's pretty good athletic-wise. Maybe he can lose a little bit of weight. I don't know. His defense is pretty good. I think that's maybe the strongest part of his game, but definitely his IQ then slows him down a little bit. So there's a lot of things that he needs to work on.
Well, I'll disagree with you on the athleticism. I think physically OG Anunoby is perfectly built for today's NBA. He's not a husk, he's thick, he's a bigger guy, but he's mobile. So I think he'll be fine in that area. But OG Anunoby, the thing that I really saw last season was he wasn't comfortable on the court. There was just a lot of stuff going on. He's a young player, the injuries and all that. We brought it up consistently in this podcast. But the one stat that you can really see that kind of be affected is free throws. Because OG Anunoby's a pretty solid three-point shooter. He can knock down the ball from the three-ball. He's never been a great free throw shooter. But, he, about midway through last season, was in the 30s, in the 40s at the free throw line. And he doesn't have the highest sample size. But that's an atrocious shooting percentage for a guy that has a decent jump shot on him. So, and now, by the end of the season, he ended up increasing it back to the 58% from the free throw line. Still a decrease from his rookie year. But the beginning of the year, the first 3-4 months, he just really wasn't into the games mentally because he was injured, because of all the stuff that happened. And once he started to get back on the court, I think comparative to his rookie year, that handle did look a lot better. His feel for the game started to improve. When he was on the court with Kyle Lowry, he was getting passes to cuts and dunks. He was having a few 15, 17-point games. And then, just as things were starting to come together, it was, the playoffs came and he had the appendix rupture. So I think it might be a different narrative talking about OG if he had to stay healthy, had to continue on that second half of the season trajectory. And maybe we'd be looking at him as saying that, maybe if he just gets that handle a little bit tighter, one little move, a shot around the rim, then he'd be good. So I'd argue that there is that potential for him to really bounce from the few games I saw from him in the second half of the season, that month or two stretch. I saw a lot of encouraging things from OG's game that, I'm going to take into the season with a lot of optimism, but that's just me. Everyone on the podcast knows I'm a huge OG stan. We want to hear what you guys think. Do you think OG will take a step forward and be a consistent, strong starter for the Toronto Raptors next season, or do you see maybe a year or two before OG really fills his role in the NBA and we figure out who he truly is? Let us know in the comment section below. You're the best for making this far. Check out the Twitter, the Instagram, all that cool stuff. Riker, you have any last words?
No, that's it for me, Ben. Cheers.